everybody, and welcome. Today, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite categories of games. The reason it's one of my favorites is because it's something that I love to do, and that is learn. Today, I'm going to be talking all about games that help you learn things. It might not be something that you ever find particularly useful. It might not be something that you ever need ever again, but it's going to be in your brain. You're going to have some new knowledge that you didn't have before. That being said, just like a couple videos that I've had, this one isn't necessarily going to be about specific game mechanics or flexibility and anything like that within the games themselves, but rather just the context around which the game is built that allows for you to learn whatever it happens to be. So with that, let's get started with a couple of honorable mentions. My first honorable mention is more of a category of games than it is a single game. And the category of games is actually trivia games. The example that I happen to have is the Big Bang Theory, a fact or fiction trivia game. Now, this is pretty much an obvious choice for a learning experience within a game, which is why it's only an honorable mention rather than in the main list. If you have a trivia game, then yes, you will learn things, and regardless of what it is, it'll still be some knowledge, be it about a TV show or something like Trivial Pursuit, or things like Seen It, all those types of games. It's not bad, it's not a bad way to learn, and you certainly will know new things, but when I learn from games and when I have games that actually teach me things, I prefer it to be part of a core mechanic within the game rather than simply a knowledge-based random move around the board and whichever space you land on determines what kind of question you answer type of game. And that's why trivia games as a category is one of my honorable mentions. My second honorable mention is a game that I have talked about at length several different times. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and it's by my favorite publisher, Z-Man Games. The game is Pandemic. Now, this is an obvious game that you can learn from because you can learn about various scientific processes as well as how disease spreads. Now, the way that I see this with this particular game is if you can learn from World of Warcraft about how disease spreads, then you can certainly learn about it from a board game. And in this case, the outbreak mechanic is really what teaches how disease spreads and all that kind of thing. That being said, there's also a relatively recent second expansion for Pandemic, which is Pandemic in the Lab. In the Lab adds a mechanic of actual scientific research going into curing these diseases, which is really, really, really cool. The way that the mechanic is implemented is a little bit unscientific, to say the least, in terms of you just put a cube on a dish and you're working towards the cure. You're working towards sequencing the genome or things like that. Which isn't a bad thing, you have to get it mechanically somehow, but at the same time it's relatively far removed from the actual scientific process, which I'm not too much of a fan of, but at the same time, again, this is certainly something you can learn from. At the very least, you can learn really good teamwork because it is a co-op game, and if you're not cooperative, you will lose. It's pretty much that simple. But that being said, again, looking at the outbreak mechanic, very similar to the Zul'Gurub disease from World of Warcraft, the outbreaks of Pandemic can teach us something about disease and science. So that's why Pandemic is one of my honorable mentions. At number 5, I've got a game that combines two of my most favorite loves ever, which are food and games. The food for this particular one is sushi, and the game is Wasabi. Again, from my favorite publisher of all time, Z-Man Games, Wasabi is a great game where you get to play as a sushi chef. You get to go and make sushi using all different ingredients that you have laid out in front of you, and you get to make different rolls. Now, why is this a game that you can learn from? Very simply, you can learn what goes into various sushi rolls. And to a certain extent, you can learn Japanese names for various ingredients that go into sushi, which I think is a pretty cool aspect. And this is one of those things where you'll probably never, ever, ever use it anytime throughout your life, but it's a cool thing to know, and I find it very interesting. And plus, it's just a fun game to play, and it's quick, and you can play it with 2 to 4 people, and it works great with any of those numbers. So that's why Wasabi is my number 5. At number 4, I've got a game that lets you attack your fellow players using the power of science. And this is a great competitive game where you get to build your own deadly cells. The game is Strain. And in this case, the little tagline is, first off, survival of the smartest, and second, a game of competitive bioengineering, which I am a huge fan of. I love this game. Now, the reason that I say you can learn from this is actually very simple. This has a great deal of information regarding cell structure and biology, which I am a huge proponent of, and not only that, but they do a very good job with it. You have things like the mitochondria, the immune system, you have viruses that can infect you, all of these kinds of things that are, for lack of anything else, and even from being simplified, very correct and very accurate. The mitochondria gives you enough energy so that you can do all sorts of other things within the cell. You can grow up your cell, you can add new things to it, you can defend against viruses using toxins, all sorts of stuff that real cells in the actual world actually do, but really simplified down so that it is accessible to pretty much anybody. One of the coolest things about this that I really like is that the viruses are actual viruses like varicella zoster. I found that very interesting, and it's something that you can learn, and it's a neat thing to learn about, but at the same time, you don't get a huge amount of knowledge from it in terms of what happens within a cell. You get sort of random tidbits that are somewhat out of context. But even so, you can know what basic functionalities different organelles have. So that's why Strain is my number 4. At number 3, I've got another sort of general category of games, and the general category is historical games. The specific example that I have for this really exemplifies the aspect in that it is 7 Wonders. Now, 7 Wonders is a great game where you can learn about the 7 wonders of the ancient world, which I think is really cool, and it's an interesting thing that you can learn about and know about. A lot of people don't know what the 7 wonders of the world are, and not only that, but a lot of historical games do a very good job of recreating specific events and time periods and all of that kind of thing. So you've got games like Memoir 44, which has specific battle scenarios that occurred during World War II. You've got one of my favorite games, Twilight Struggle, and its sister game, Labyrinth, which both contain cards of events and people that were very important during the Civil and the War on Terror, respectively. Or not Civil, the Cold War, sorry. But either way, historical games as a general category are wonderful learning tools. And it's actually somewhat surprising in some cases. This does go back a little bit to my video on legendary games, or games based on myth and legend, in which you can learn a lot about the various legends like the Arthurian legends and Greek and Norse myths and all that kind of thing. This fits into that same kind of category, but this is more, I guess you could say, solid history, wherein, you know, for example, the 7 wonders of the ancient world, most of them are still standing. And, you know, things like Memoir 44, we know what happened in World War II, we have very good records, all of that kind of thing. But again, in the context of a game, I really like the idea of learning from a historical game because it basically feels like you're not learning, but you are gaining a great deal of knowledge about different events that occurred at different times. So that's why 7 Wonders and historical games in general are my number 3. At number 2, I've got a great game that I had actually never heard of until I saw it on the shelf of my local game store. The game is called The New Science. This is a wonderful game that really explores the in-depth discoveries and processes of not only science, but specifically during the Renaissance era, when a great deal of scientific research and discoveries happened and were found. In this particular case, you pick one of several famous scientists who all contributed to their individual fields in different ways. And the idea is that you research specific tracks of science in order to make new discoveries and ultimately publish papers. And the great thing about this is that it really does a wonderful job of recreating the scientific process, where you need to come up with a hypothesis, and then you have to experiment to test it, and eventually, hopefully, you get it published. There is a mechanic in this where you actually publish your research, and then it's available to everybody to use. One of the other great things is that this shows a lot of the integration amongst different scientific disciplines that people tend to miss out on. You've got your biology and your chemistry, your physics, all of these kinds of things that all sort of coalesce and allow us to make new discoveries overall by using knowledge from different fields. This game really captures that very well. And again, you have actual scientists as the players that you can actually read about. They have little blurbs about what the people did, which I think is really interesting because, again, you get to learn about not only a time period in general, but what happened and who the important players were, at least in this specific context, the science of the Renaissance era. So that's why the new science is my number 2. At number 1 is a game that breaks pretty much every single rule I've had about any video I've ever done. But I am so passionate about it that I felt the need to break all of them. This is not only a game that I haven't played, but I also do not own it, and nor do pretty much anybody in the entire world. It's a game that hasn't been released yet. It's called Antimatter Matters, and I will represent it today with this cool little alien head. So, Antimatter Matters is a wonderful game that's coming from Elbowfish, which is a small publisher up in the northwest of the U.S. They're taking pre-orders now, by the way, so go and buy yours because small publishers need your money. Anyway, Antimatter Matters seems like a wonderful game. They have a lot of videos demoing how to play, how the mechanics work, all of that kind of stuff. And from what I've seen, it is great. It is wonderful. It is well made, well researched, and it just seems incredible. The idea behind the game is that you are a scientist who is essentially trying to recreate an atom. And you go all the way down to the level of not only the subatomic of the protons and the neutrons and the electrons, but down even farther to things like the quarks and the gluons and all of those pieces. And the idea is that you have to collect up those different pieces using various scientific machinery, such as the Hadron Colliders, all of those kinds of things, to gather up the pieces to actually build up an atom. And it's very exciting. It is extremely in-depth scientifically, which I love. I think it's amazing. And I honestly cannot wait to play it. I love all of the videos that they have. If you haven't seen any of them, please check them out. Again, they seem absolutely wonderful. I'm excited to play. It's actually shipping, hopefully, towards the end of November or early December of this year. And that's why that Antimatter Matters is my number 1 game that you can learn from. That's it for me, everybody. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed my video on games that you can learn from, even if the things that you're learning aren't exactly helpful in any way, shape, or form. So with that, once again, thank you very much for coming by, and I will see you next time.